Prime Minister fights for his political life after the resignations of his Chancellor and his Health Secretary. They both quit, saying they cannot serve in his government. The words in their resignation letters were devastating and came within minutes of each other. The warning signs were flashing all around the cabinet table this morning, grim faces in the wake of the scandal over the MP Chris Pincher, as it became clear the PM knew about allegations of sexual misconduct against him before appointing him. Tonight, Boris Johnson tried to salvage the situation with this apology.
I apologise for it. I think in hindsight it was the wrong thing to do. I wish that we had, I in particular, had acted on it.
Well, tonight he is desperately trying to shore up his government, already replacing his Chancellor, Health and Education Secretary. We're live here tonight at Downing Street to take you through all of the day's events and why today it has reached boiling point with all of our team here in Westminster. How did it come to this after Partygate and 2 by-election losses? Why was Chris Pincher the tipping point? Paul Brand looks at the many crises for the PM in the last 6 months. Has the PM done enough tonight to stem the flow, or will the party now act? And from SW1 to SW19. Cameron Norrie is through to the Wimbledon semi-finals.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham in Downing Street.
Well, good evening from Downing Street on a night of high drama which has seen the PM fighting for his political life. After a string of crises and scandals, there came a tipping point moment which saw within minutes of one another, just after 6 p.m, the resignation of both Health Secretary Sajid Javid and Chancellor Rishi Sunak, both political body blows to Mr Johnson. They cited standards and integrity as their reasoning in excoriating letters. After another 24 hours of challenges and changes to Downing Street's version of events surrounding the appointment of Chris Pincher as Deputy Chief Whip. Even a chaste apology from Mr Johnson, finally admitting he'd got it wrong, wasn't enough to stop the near simultaneous resignations from 2 possible successors. And they're not the only members of the government to go. A clutch of junior ministers and private secretaries have abandoned ship too. Well, tonight, Robert, it won't surprise you, will be alongside me analysing what this all means for Mr Johnson and the likely next acts in this fast-moving political drama tonight. And this evening here in Downing Street, Mr Johnson has been shoring up his leadership, or saving his political skin, depending on your point of view. He's shifted his close ally, Steve Barclay, from Chief of Staff to Mr Javid's health job. The Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, will be taking over at number 11 behind us here as the new Chancellor.
The Prime Minister arriving home in a hurry after hearing the last news that he wanted. His Chancellor and Health Secretary had resigned, having lost confidence in him. Prime Minister, have you got a comment about the Chancellor's resignation?
Good morning, colleagues.
This morning's Cabinet meeting. Is there any sign on the faces of Sajid Javid and of Rishi Sunak that they'd come to believe Boris Johnson was neither competent or had integrity? And at 6:02 this evening, the Health Secretary published a stinging resignation letter that said the country needs a strong and principled Conservative party, and the party is bigger than any one individual. I served you, Prime Minister, loyally and as a friend, but we all serve the country first. When made to choose between those 2 loyalties, there can be only one answer. Then 9 minutes later, in his resignation statement, the Chancellor said, the public rightly expect government to be conducted properly, competently and seriously. I recognise this might be my last ministerial job, but I believe these standards are worth fighting for, and that is why I'm resigning. And they weren't the last resignations of the day. In the following 3 hours, 5 others quit from more junior government and party posts. A Health Secretary going home tonight to start a new career.
I'm just going to go and spend some time with my family. Thank you.
The symbol, perhaps, of a full-scale crisis for the Prime Minister on a day that started badly enough for him. when a former top official from the Foreign Office, Lord MacDonald, wrote to the Parliamentary Commission of Standards complaining that officials in 10 Downing Street and ministers hadn't been telling the truth about what the Prime Minister knew about alleged groping by his minister, Chris Pincher, when he was appointed as Deputy Chief Whip.
I know that the senior official briefed the Prime Minister in person because that official told me so at the time. I think they need to come clean.
What MacDonald alleged, correctly as it turns out, was that a number of cabinet ministers, including Welfare Secretary Therese Coffey, had misled when saying the Prime Minister knew nothing of Pincher's misconduct. He resigned after the latest set of allegations on Thursday. Shortly after that, the Welsh Secretary played for time.
Whip and others will be looking at all of the surrounding context of this and then deciding which way to go forward.
And then Therese Coffey herself said,
"The Prime Minister has not been aware of specific allegations against Chris Pincher."
Followed on Monday by Will Quince.
I've been given a cast iron categorical assurance that the Prime Minister was not aware of any complaint.
All wrong, as the Prime Minister admitted.
Yes, I think it was a mistake, and I apologise for it. I think in hindsight it was the wrong thing to do. It was something that was only raised with me very cursorily, but I wish that we had, I in particular, had acted on it and that he had not continued in government, because he then went on, I'm afraid, to behave, as far as we can see, according to the allegations that we have, very, very badly. And I'm sorry for those who've been badly affected by it.
But Labour was unforgiving.
The Prime Minister was personally informed about these allegations, and yet he was either negligent or complicit. When will this minister stop defending the indefensible and say enough is enough?
Last week, when fresh allegations arose, the Prime Minister did not immediately recall the conversation in late 2019 about this incident. As soon as he was reminded, the Number 10 press office corrected their public lines.
Perhaps the Prime Minister's most enthusiastic ally tried to say, crisis? What crisis?
I thought the Chancellor made a very fair point in his letter when he said that his differences with the Prime Minister were simply too big. And I think we were seeing that in the tax rises that we were getting that were very much led by the Treasury, and that actually you need a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who have the same vision for the country. That's very important, it's very beneficial. And I think there were signs for some time that the relationship wasn't really working.
But a senior Tory backbencher believes it's the end for Boris Johnson.
At the end of the day, I think, unfortunately, the Prime Minister has run out of road because he has lost credibility.
For now, the Prime Minister is clinging on. He's appointed his Chief of Staff, Steve Barclay, as new Health Secretary, and here's the Education Secretary going into Number 10 to get his dream job of Chancellor. The ill wind for the Prime Minister has blown some good for Nadhim Zahawi. Robert Peston, News at 10.
And as promised, Robert is here. It's a pretty extraordinary day and night behind the black door. It's only a few moments since we saw the new Chancellor emerge. Very quickly take us through these new key appointments tonight, Robert.
Yeah, so two ultra-loyalists, Nadhim Zahawi, appointed as Chancellor. Chief of Staff, Steve Barclay, appointed to run the Health Service. Now, in the events of the last sort of week or so, you'd say there's been a bit of chaos in Downing Street. Steve Barclay was brought in, shall we say, to end the chaos. Doesn't seem to have worked, so he's been given the NHS to run.
OK, they're the headlines from the last sort of couple of hours, but let's take in the broader picture. This has been a devastating day for the Prime Minister, hasn't it? Where does it leave him tonight? And what are you hearing from elsewhere in Westminster?
So let's be clear about the Prime Minister's woes. It wasn't all that long ago. He broke the law, fined for illegal parties in there. Then we had that extraordinary vote of confidence in him, in which 41% of his MPs, a majority of his backbenchers, said they preferred chaos to him remaining as Prime Minister. And then those two incredibly embarrassing by-election losses, including the loss of one incredibly safe seat in Tiverton. So some Tory MPs were saying to me tonight, when they saw the Health Secretary and the Chancellor both saying that they'd lost confidence in the Prime Minister's moral leadership, and actually the Chancellor also saying he'd lost confidence in the Prime Minister's economic judgment. There were many MPs saying they weren't sure that the Prime Minister was going to last the night. But Those who know Prime Minister well know that Boris Johnson will have to be dragged out of there. He's never going to go voluntarily, and he's moved very fast to shore up his team with these appointments that we've just talked about. But backbenchers are not placated. Just been talking to a very senior Tory, and he said to me, the Prime Minister's got 2 weeks or 4 months. What that comes down to, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about this later in the programme, is whether the rules are changed that allow another vote of confidence earlier than the year that is currently, the year from now is currently the rule. There is an expectation that that rule will be changed, but when the next vote of confidence comes is a degree of uncertainty around that, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure.
Indeed, it is all about the timetable, effectively, from now, isn't it? Robert, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, according to many Conservative MPs we've spoken today, feelings have been running higher about Downing Street's handling of the Chris Pincher resignation than about its handling of so-called Partygate. For Labour, its leader, Sir Keir Starmer, said it's clear the government is collapsing. A change of Conservative leader wasn't enough, he said. There needs to be a change of government to give Britain the fresh start it needs.
What matters for Boris Johnson right now is the view of Conservative MPs. And tonight, there was a big range.
The Roman Empire is collapsing. There you are. You heard it here first.
For some, like James Gray, it is game over. For others, like Philip Davies, the PM still has something to play for.
Is he still the Prime Minister?
Do you have full confidence?
No, is he still the Prime Minister?
Yes, he's currently the Prime Minister.
So it's not all over for him, is it?
The resignations of the Chancellor and Health Secretary were, of course, the hot topic in every tea room and bar here in Parliament, where the Labour leader turned his fire on the Cabinet.
Tory Cabinet Ministers have been cheerleaders for Johnson throughout this sorry saga. They backed him when he broke the law. They backed him when he lied. They backed him when he mocked the sacrifices of the British people. So they have been complicit as he has disgraced his office and let down his country. And frankly, if they had a shred of integrity, they would have gone months ago.
But going tonight was clearly significant, with some ministers trying to avoid questions.
We're just off to an event. But what's the mood in the party this evening like? Just off to an event, aren't we?
Arad Waller focused mainly on his dinner.
Tucking into your chicken now, your jerk chicken.
Tuesday is a good day for jerk chicken in Parliament. That is top of my agenda currently. Look, it's not great, is it, clearly? I hope he stays. It becomes increasingly difficult, doesn't it?
And yet more disagreement.
I think the Prime Minister will need to consider very carefully whether he has the moral authority to govern.
Do you support the Prime
Minister? Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And do you think he can survive this?
Yeah, I think he probably will, yeah.
How does he do that?
By carrying on.
But carrying on wasn't something that voters in Sajid Javid's constituency of Bromsgrove were calling for.
It's a sad indictment, actually, on the Prime Minister that one of his members is having to show the integrity that he lacks, and he's having to resign instead of the Prime Minister.
I think they've exited before the storm really hits and protects their career.
Nor in Rishi Sunak's Yorkshire seat of Richmond.
He would be much better at the role than Boris Johnson. I think he's got a way better background now. It wouldn't be an embarrassment to the UK anymore.
Back in Westminster, even Boris Johnson's biggest supporters are unsure of what next.
It's a fast-moving event.
Has he still got your full support?
You're going to end up, he certainly does, you're going to end up getting run over.
They hope their leader will stay standing for now, but they know this is a huge blow. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
Well, after months of growing concern, not to say rising anger among many Conservative MPs about the Prime Minister's leadership, it has been his and Downing Street's handling of the Chris Pincher row that appears to have been the final straw for Mr Sunak and Mr Javid. Mr Johnson survived the exposés about lockdown parties here in Number 10 and those 2 by-election defeats and more besides. So what can Mr Johnson do now to survive this evening's resignations?
I renew my wholehearted apology. I think it was a mistake and I apologise. I once again offer a full apology.
Apology after apology has left Downing Street in a sorry state. A Prime Minister ridden with a roll call of regrets.
His fictional party was a business meeting.
and it was not socially distanced.
If Boris Johnson's critics get the last laugh, then it all began with this. Whether it was breaking lockdown laws at a Christmas party or a birthday party, many have long been arguing the next leaving party should be Boris Johnson's own.
He is a serial liar and he is unfit for office. This Prime Minister our Prime Minister is a disgrace. It's time for him to go. Finally, he must go.
Even at legal gatherings, he's been punished by Partygate. There were boos at the Jubilee. A Prime Minister who won a landslide victory now felt public patience slipping away. His MPs kept their confidence, at least enough of them.
I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
But the pain showed in the polls.
And I do hereby declare that Richard John Ford is duly elected.
And then at the ballot box, 3 by-elections lost since Partygate, 2 in one night. Even the international stage couldn't deflect from the domestic as his party grows concerned about the cost.
Boris Johnson is a huge problem for the Conservatives as things stand at the moment. His ratings are very, very low. More than 2/3 of people think that he's doing a bad job, and that includes a majority of people who voted Conservative at the last election.
If the truth has proven troublesome for this Prime Minister, tonight he continues to ask his party and public to trust him, but there are ever fewer he can trust in return. Paul Brand, News at 10.
Well, we can speak now to our northern reporter Sangeeta Lal, who's in Wakefield tonight for us, one of the Blue Wall constituencies, of course, that turned red in that recent by-election. Sangeeta, what's the reaction been there tonight?
Well, it's not just shock. People are completely devastated here at what is happening to the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson won over so many people here in 2019, appealing to grassroots working class people across the historically Labour voting so-called red wall seats. People really trusted him to create change. It seems they don't anymore.
I think they did the right thing. I think they had no option. Basically, at the end of the day, they had absolutely no option.
Disappointed, more than anything else, to be fair. The situation is we expected a lot more of them, and they've just let the country go to ruin.
I think they're very honourable in resigning, but what I can't understand is if they knew that Boris Johnson were telling lies, why they left it till this time to resign, and why hasn't
It's
Boris
worth remembering
Johnson...
how significant that win was. The fact that people here wanted to vote for Conservatives for the first time. This has been historically Wakefield, a Labour voting area. So many people here were voting Conservative for the first time. The fact that that has now changed in the latest by-election so quickly back to a Labour voting seat just shows how little trust people have in him here. They previously backed him to not only be the man to create change, but to be a man that would win elections. It's not just MPs that do not believe that anymore, but people once here again.
Sangeeta, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, since the resignations this evening, our team at Westminster have been trying to contact all of the Cabinet to gauge their loyalty to the Prime Minister. As we know, of course, Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid have gone, but right across the Cabinet, Mr Johnson has received commitments of support, and that includes from some of those who might fancy having a go at succeeding him, like Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and Michael Gove. More to come throughout the coming hours and days on that, no doubt. But we can cross now to Anushka, who's outside an event in Westminster attended by a number of MPs. It's that time of year, isn't it, Anushka? There have been several resignations at lower levels too, and the language has been pretty damning, hasn't it?
Yeah, very damning. Some of the letters specifically talking about the lack of ability to tell the truth. Pure anger after Number 10 on Friday gave one story when it came to what happened around Chris Pincher, and then today had to admit, the Prime Minister himself had to admit that he had been warned about Chris Pincher's behaviour. And interestingly, one MP I spoke to today said there was more anger among colleagues about this than about Partygate, partly because that role, that Deputy Chief Whip, is seen as the person who's supposed to take a kind of pastoral care of the party role, and so it seemed particularly to anger people that the Prime Minister, knowing about the specific allegation, to allow him to go into that position. When you speak to people today, and they've been chatting at this party here where there was a Cabinet Minister to raise coffee and backbench MPs, and all over Parliament, in the tea rooms, in the bars, they clearly think that this is a huge thing. They think that the Prime Minister will survive the night because so few of the other cabinet members followed suit. But one very senior MP said to me, there's no way he's going to survive beyond Monday. Now, I said to him, well, why? How? What actually happens in process terms for that to happen? And the truth is that if the Prime Minister doesn't want to go, then the 1922 committee, those backbench MPs, have to find a way to somehow force him out. And we have elections for that committee coming out next week. A number of critics of the Prime Minister are trying to get onto that committee to try and change the rules so that they can bring forward a confidence vote. They'd love to have a confidence vote, the critics of the PM, if they could, before the summer recess. They think that if they didn't, then it becomes harder in the longer term. But at the moment, the conversations, even among, as you saw in the piece we did earlier, even among some of his biggest supporters, they are still supporting him, but they're not sure about where it goes from here.
OK, Anushka, thank you very much indeed for that. Some interesting comings and going behind you there, just as there have been here in Downing Street tonight. Well, we can speak now to a prominent voice from the Conservative Party, Conservative peer Lord Heseltine. Of course, was a prominent figure in the governments of Margaret Thatcher and John Major, and has seen many Tory Prime Ministers come and go, and he joins us this evening. Very good evening to you, Lord Heseltine, and you know very well, perhaps better than most, what happens when a leader loses power. Given your involvement with Margaret Thatcher, what do you make of what you've witnessed today?
I think it was predictable that this was going to happen. Once you saw the 140 MPs voting against the Prime Minister, and when you saw Michael Howard and William Hague, former leaders of the party, saying he had to go, it really was only a matter of time. And the latest event has, I think, now made it inevitable that it will happen sooner rather than later.
And yet we saw those two big resignations in very quick succession. He spent the whole evening shoring up his position, replacing those key positions very fast, and actually things seem to have settled here this evening.
Well, that may be an impression that people want to create. I think one of the anxieties that would be around the place is that quite a few of the cabinet are known to be very loyal to Boris and are unlikely to be in any replacement cabinet. So they are clinging like minor limpets, as Boris is clinging like a major limpet to the rock. But I'm afraid that I think you just can't overestimate the toxicity of the feeling out there. I mean, I was in a big public event yesterday, and 12 people stopped me and asked me what the heck the party was going to do. I've never known anything like that, and that's just my personal experience. But of course, the problem is that there is a deep divide within the Conservative Party. I coined the phrase that if Boris goes, Brexit goes, because this pattern of lying, of deceiving people, of presenting arguments in a totally fallacious way, that's been going on since Boris became leader of the party. And one of the reasons why Wakefield went back to the Labour Party is that they thought that all the stuff about Brexit was going to change their situation. Actually, the situation is worse than at the time of the referendum. And of course, in the South, the Lib Dems are making great gain.
Yes. But we've been in a position, haven't we, literally just a blink of an eye ago, where there was a vote of confidence, which he got through. He's steadying the ship as he sees it tonight. And it's 2 weeks before summer recess. there is a chance here for him. There'll be a lot of people that point to his record, his supporters who will point to his record, not least on Ukraine, not least on the COVID vaccines. What would you say to that?
Well, the COVID, I think they did a reasonable job. But if you compare it with other comparable economies, it was about the same. On Ukraine, again, I think they've said the right things and done the right things. But it is broadly the policy that would be pursued by, in my view, any British government, any defence secretary would argue and behave in the way they have. So I don't think that's going to change at all. But I don't think you can just believe it's going to be easy to get through the next few days. What's going to happen in the House of Commons is that there's going to be a group of people standing for election to the executive of the 1922 on the basis that they will change the rules so that another vote can take place within a different timescale to the present 1 year. And my guess is that they will win and that the rules will be changed. But it is also possible that the feeling amongst MPs is such, as you see and is being indicated all through your news coverages, that the Prime Minister will be told by enough senior people that the game is up. If you go back to Mrs. Thatcher, there was a stalking horse which she didn't take enough notice of. Then I stood against her. She technically lost, but actually in numbers won. But within a day, the Cabinet had told her she had to go. And I suspect that the feeling at the top end of the Tory party is now quite clearly committed to his departure.
And who should replace him in your view, Lord Heseltine, very briefly, if it comes to that?
Well, I think we'll wait and see, because it is for members of Parliament to decide. And frankly, I have been out of Parliament now for nearly 20 years. I don't know the candidates. I'm not in a position to make a really informed judgment.
Lord Heseltine, thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To some other news now tonight, and the suspected gunman from yesterday's Independence Day shooting in the United States is safely in custody after hours of searching by police. They say he'd been planning the attack for weeks. When they found him, he was disguised in women's clothes. He fired 70 rounds from a rooftop overlooking a parade through the Chicago suburb of Highland Park. His father once ran for mayor there.
After the terror and after the deaths, the end was surprisingly calm.
It's the shooter! Yeah.
Robert Crimo, the 21-year-old suspected of firing on a holiday parade, ordered at gunpoint from the small silver car he was driving. Not for him, the bloody end that had been inflicted on others. In the hours before, he was America's most wanted man. The latest, certainly not the last name, to be added to this country's shaming roll call of mass killer suspects.
We do believe Crimo pre-planned this attack for several weeks. He brought a high-powered rifle to this parade. He accessed the roof of a business via a fire escape ladder and began opening fire on the innocent Independence Day celebration goers. During the attack, Crimo was dressed in women's clothing, and investigators do believe he did this to conceal his facial tattoos and his identity and help him during the escape with the other people who were fleeing the chaos.
This is their suspect. With a legally bought high-powered rifle, he's accused of firing from a rooftop into an Independence Day parade. Illinois has some of America's strictest gun laws, but they made no difference.
For a second, everybody froze, literally like time stood still. And then we looked down the street right over there, and we saw the crowd running toward us and screaming. And it was like mass hysteria. And people were just running in droves across the railroad tracks.
This is Robert Crimo in videos he posted online. At least one appears to depict a classroom scene where, dressed in tactical clothing, he wraps himself in the flag. That he's from the Highland Park community has added to the sense of shock.
It breaks my heart. It absolutely breaks my heart. I see this picture, and through the tattoos, I see the little boy. It's heartbreaking. I don't know what got him to this point.
It is a question that has been asked of so many others, with different names in different towns, but as a result of very similar tragedy. Emma Murphy, News at 10 in the United States.
Back here now, and the big question at Wimbledon today for fans of British tennis was, can the last man standing, Cameron Norrie, reach his first ever Grand Slam semi-final? Well, the answer, it turned out, was yes, he can. He won in 5 edge-of-the-seat sets. If the match had been decided simply by the volume of cheering on number 1 court, it would have been finished much sooner.
The experienced Belgian David Goffin.
No one expected Cameron Norrie's first Grand Slam quarter-final to be easy, and as the last British player left at this year's Wimbledon, the pressure was well and truly on.
Looking so calm, winning.
With thousands watching inside the ground and millions more at home, it looked for a while as though it might finally be getting to him. His Belgian opponent David Goffin took the first set.
And Cam Norrie's going to have to try and change something, find something in court number 1.
But Norrie soon settled down to even the score. After winning another set each, it went to a nail-biting decider. From Norrie's family to the royal family, everyone was on the edge of their seats. But 26-year-old Norrie managed to keep his nerve. To become only the 4th British man ever to reach the Wimbledon semi-finals. His dad, David, could only utter the word wow, and he wasn't the only one lost for words.
Honestly, speechless. Can't even talk.
When he did find his voice, it was to thank the crowd for theirs.
I couldn't find my game, and then thanks to you guys.
Some of them had been queuing since dawn in the hope of getting their hands on a ticket, and to them, the 26-year-old was never in doubt.
Norrie, he's the man. He's going to do it today.
Touching wood, I think he'll do really well, and we're all behind him to do well.
Norrie, I've bet my whole house on you. I've got all my savings on this match. Please do it for me. Please, I need this. My kids are depending on it.
Norrie is now through to the semi-finals, but on paper at least he faces his toughest opponent yet. The number 1 seed Novak Djokovic hasn't lost a match on centre court for 9 years. Although he was given a run for his money today by 20-year-old Italian Yannick Sinner,
Djokovic is falling apart at the seams a little here. He's gone,
who forced him to come back from 2 sets down. Another reminder of how exciting, how unpredictable this tournament can be. Chloe Keedy, News at 10, Wimbledon. Well, meanwhile, back here in Downing Street, Robert's here for a final thought. I mean, another day to take a deep breath and assess what we've seen in just the last few hours. Robert, where are we?
So, I mean, Boris Johnson's prime ministership has been chaotic like none any of us have lived through. He's tried to shore himself up tonight by appointing 3 new cabinet, well, not new cabinet ministers, but 3 cabinet ministers to new jobs. A sort of little fun fact for you, Michelle Donnellan, the new education secretary, haven't talked about her at all, first addressed the Tory conference at the age of 15, and she's now got her dream job as education secretary. For the prime minister, he now has 2 incredibly anxious, life-defining weeks, because in just 2 weeks, in 1 day's time, it's those long summer holidays for MPs, and that will give him a bit of a breathing space. It's very hard to throw a prime minister out during the vacation. Not impossible, but very hard. And so he will therefore do anything he can to avoid another vote of confidence in those 2 weeks, and then hope that he can set a new agenda over the summer. Now, one of the things we learned today is there are now going to be regular press conferences about how to rescue our ailing economy. We've got the worst economic crisis any of us can remember. And he will hope that initiatives like that will help to rebuild confidence. But one other just final bit of bad news for him tonight. YouGov, an opinion poll company actually created by his new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, says today that a majority of 2019 Tory voters have lost confidence in Boris Johnson. Not the best news on the worst of all possible days.
Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. And that is just about it from Downing Street. Behind the famous Black Door, the Prime Minister is reshuffling his depleted pack, shoring up his position and no doubt thinking ahead to tomorrow's Prime Minister's questions. The resignations of Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak will have prompted the thought in many at Westminster that the clock really may be ticking on the Johnson premiership now. Thank you for being with us for the past 35 minutes. From Downing Street, good night.